But Grant had enormous control of his emotions. There was physical courage.
A big sweeping saga about the Civil War and Reconstruction, and Grant is the person who is at the center.
Did you know that the Union's biggest hero started out as a guy who couldn't keep a job? That same person was also just a small-town hatmaker before he saved the Union in the American Civil War. From his humble beginnings to retiring from the military, this is the incredible story of how Ulysses S. Grant, an unlikely hero, led the Union to triumph. How does someone with a simple start become great? Ulysses S. Grant, born Hiram Ulysses Grant on April 27, 1822 in Ohio, didn't look like he was cut out for success at all. His father, a tanner, didn't see much potential in him and pushed him toward a military career, thinking it was his only option. So why did Grant go to West Point? It wasn't his dream, it was his father's way of giving him direction. And what about his famous name? How did Hiram Ulysses become Ulysses S. Grant? It was actually a clerical mistake at West Point that gave him the name we know today. The S didn't mean anything, but it stuck, and Grant just went along with it. Was he a top student? Not really. Grant didn't do so good at West Point, and there weren't any signs of future greatness. But then the Mexican-American War came along from 1846 to 1848, and that's when everything changed. This is where Grant's real talents showed up. He stayed calm under pressure, was brave but careful, and earned the trust and respect of his men. These traits didn't make him stand out at West Point, but they would be crucial later in his life. After the war, Grant headed back to St. Louis with one big goal: marrying Julia Dent, the daughter of a slave-owning Missouri farmer. Did this marriage change his life? Absolutely, but they had their problems. Grant was happiest when he was with Julia, but the military had other plans, often keeping them apart for long stretches. So, what did that lead to? Sadly, loneliness got the better of Grant, pushing him into a battle with alcohol that would follow him for years. But what happens when a man hits rock bottom? For Grant, it happened in a remote post in Northern California. His drinking spiraled out of control, and instead of facing a court-martial, he chose to resign from the military, leaving behind what seemed like a shattered career, or so it seemed at the time. So, how do you claw your way back after hitting rock bottom? After leaving the military, Grant's life didn't exactly get easier. He struggled to find steady work, and one business flop followed another. By 1860, he was back in his father's store in Galena, Illinois, selling hats to local farmers. A man who had once commanded troops now found himself broke, with no prospects, and seemingly at the end of his rope. But then came the Civil War. Could this be his shot at redemption? The Union was desperate for experienced soldiers, and despite his recent failures, Grant's leadership skills quickly stood out. He rocketed up the ranks. In just 6 months, he scored major victories at Fort Henry and Fort Donelson. How critical were these wins? They were huge for the Union, marking the beginning of Grant's incredible comeback. But it wasn't until the Battle of Shiloh in April 1862 that Grant really proved himself. Why was this battle so important? It was the bloodiest battle in American history up to that point, with heavy losses on both sides. The Union forces were caught off guard and almost defeated, but Grant's refusal to retreat changed everything. The Union held their ground, and Grant became a true hero, a leader who could win, no matter the odds. What made Grant's strategy different? Unlike other generals who were often too afraid, Grant's approach was simple: always push forward, always keep the pressure on. Why did this work so well? If you're enjoying this video so far, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Grant knew that the Union's strengths in manpower, technology, and resources would only be effective if they stayed on the attack. His ability to read maps and spot enemy weaknesses also made him a strong leader. One of Grant's best campaigns was the 1863 Siege of Vicksburg. Why was Vicksburg so important? It was a key Confederate stronghold on the Mississippi River, and capturing it was crucial for the Union. Grant's strategy was smart. By surrounding the city, he forced it to surrender, splitting the Confederacy in two. How big was this victory? It was a major turning point in the war and is still studied in military schools today. In March 1864, President Lincoln made Grant the commander of all Union armies. What did this mean for the war? It changed everything. Under Grant's leadership, the Union Army used a strategy of total war, targeting not just Confederate soldiers but also the resources they needed to fight. It was a tough approach, but it was necessary. By the spring of 1865, Confederate forces were falling apart, and Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia was on the verge of collapse. How did Grant and Lincoln's relationship develop over time? Believe it or not, Grant wasn't even on Lincoln's radar at the start of the war. In fact, when it all began, Lincoln had no idea who Grant was. So, how did they end up working so well together? As the war went on and Grant kept delivering victories, Lincoln began to take notice. The two men grew closer, forming a powerful partnership. What made their collaboration so effective? Lincoln admired Grant's determination and no-nonsense approach, while Grant respected Lincoln's unwavering vision for the nation. In April 1865, after almost 4 years of intense fighting, Robert E. Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. Why was this moment such a big deal? It basically ended the Civil War. Grant's actions during the surrender were remarkable. He treated Lee and the defeated Confederate soldiers with dignity and respect, which helped start the healing process for the nation. But the victory came with a bitter twist. Shortly after returning to Washington, Grant was invited by Lincoln to attend a play at Ford's Theater. Grant accepted the invite, but his wife, Julia, wasn't thrilled and urged him to decline. Feeling pressured, Grant made an excuse, and they didn't go. That night, Lincoln was tragically assassinated, a heartbreaking end to the partnership that had saved the Union. What happens when a war hero becomes president? After Lincoln's death, the country was in chaos, and Ulysses S. Grant found himself in a role he hadn't really planned for. He was great on the battlefield, but could he handle politics? In many ways, yes. In 1868, Grant ran for president as the Republican candidate and won easily. So, what did he achieve? Quite a lot. He passed the 15th Amendment, which made sure all American citizens, no matter their race, had the right to vote. But that's not all. Did you know Grant also created the Department of Justice and fought against the Ku Klux Klan? He even stood up for Native American rights. But was his presidency perfect? Unfortunately, no. Scandals and corruption, mostly involving people around him, damaged his reputation. So, when he left office in 1877, his image wasn't as strong as it could have been. But even with these issues, Grant was still a respected and popular figure. So, what do you do after such a high-pressure career? After leaving the presidency, Grant's life took a rough turn. He was facing financial problems and then got diagnosed with terminal throat cancer. What was his plan? Grant, being the fighter he was, decided to write his memoirs to secure his family's future. But could he finish in time? It was a race against the clock, and Grant knew it. Every page he wrote was a battle, pushing through the pain to share his story. And who helped him publish these memoirs? None other than Mark Twain. Did Twain's help make a difference? Definitely. Twain convinced Grant to take his publishing deal, promising it would take care of his family. And was it a success? Absolutely. The memoirs were a huge hit, earning over $500,000, a lot of money back then. Today, Grant's memoirs are still considered one of the greatest works of American literature, giving a first-hand account of the Civil War from the man who helped end it. Grant finished his work just days before his death on July 23, 1885, leaving behind a powerful legacy. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to click on our next one for a deep dive into another incredible chapter of history.